we start to see, hey, they're really highly anxious, or they're not. They got a lot of joy. They got a lot of hate. They got a little, or anger. They don't have, we don't have, we have sadness and anger, not hate, but all these types of scores. And so we start to see how they're feeling and why they're feeling that way. And then you always have the stories themselves with quotes and you can go in once you can use GPT to like analyze something and then say, okay, give me 3 quotes that represent that in the stories. And here GPT comes with, 3 profound statements that you're like, oh, wow. I have in minutes, we can take a customer to have a whole new perspective on something they've worked on for 10 years. And it's almost like they just birthed a new baby. Like they'll be like, oh my God. And they're always surprised, shocked, and happy about it. So it's really fun.
Step into the world of success with your brand amplified, the ultimate podcast designed to unravel the intricacies of thriving businesses. I'm your host, Annika Jackson, and I'm on a mission to uncover the stories, strategies, and secrets that have propelled entrepreneurs and business leaders to success. I could not be more thrilled with my next guest, Andy Sitison, CTO of Share More Stories. Andy, just in our little conversation before we pushed record and all of the great information that you provided me, as well as what I found on the internet, I'm just really intrigued by how you've shaped your career and your narrative because you've done so many different things. Yes, you've been at the forefront of tech. You've been working in AI for longer than many of us knew that it existed. But you also are a nonprofit founder. You also are a family man and have poured a lot into that. You have so many interesting projects going on. And I really truly believe that this helps you shape the narrative of Share More Stories and how you work in the world of tech. So thank you, first and foremost, for being here today.
Hey, it was great to get that read back. I mean, you're right. And I hadn't thought about it in that way a lot. So it's a nice context, a nice framing.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'm so glad that you think so, because this is truly from everything you provided me. You called it a data dump, but it really is a great picture of who you are as a strategic creative. So we talk a little bit about how you came to realize that you were a strategic creative.
Let me do that in an efficient manner. And you just hold up a big, move on a flag or something if I keep going too long, because, I've been doing this for a while, but I'll start at the very beginning. I've always been creative, though, a multi-generational creative family. And we created in all sorts of ways as a kid, but I was a musician. I loved, you can see the guitars and banjos and stuff behind me. I wanted to be that guy on stage at one point, and then just realized I didn't trust that life enough. So then I went into psychology because I thought, well, I like helping people. So maybe it's psychology, and I actually got my undergrad in that. But I also realized that at the time, what you were supposed to do is sit back and let everybody solve their own problems. And I'm like, maybe I'm more of an analyst because I want to solve the problem and get moving. I don't have patience. So, but I've always been creative. And as I was looking, it was a struggle for a couple of years to figure out. We opened a restaurant, did that for a few years. And then my wife got a job at IBM in Rock. And I said, this is a nice life. I don't have to work weekends. And, maybe I can do programming and all this stuff. So I jumped in and didn't have the math and actually created a stutter for about 6 months because I started using the other side of my brain. I was very right-brained, very left-handed person. And then I needed all the left brain parts. And so I fire on both, which is a kind of a unique mindset. But what I found was programming was creative. So I dove in and I realized it's just like writing songs or writing books or whatever. Writing code and solving solutioning problems was really fun and gave me an outlet. And so I went along that path. I integrated companies and worked in manufacturing spaces and new drug development and nuclear and helped them stand up systems. And it was fun, but I was traveling a lot. I thought, well, maybe I'll just go to one of these big high-tech companies and see what that means. And so I went to a really fun, really high-grade company. And then I traveled even more over time because I eventually took over Latin America and then took all the Americas and then all the country, whole world for a kind of a business application spin. This was a more IT group, and I was more business apps. So it was, again, back to kind of the creative deployment of systems for corporations. And most of the companies we work with in Fortune 100s back then. And that kind of got us into the cloud space. And I was kind of really, I wouldn't say I'm like the cloud guy, but we were driving billions of dollars to the cloud on people that had rolled out 100 million to $1 billion deployment. So these are very expensive, important things that run everything we touched, all our financial transactions and all that. And so we were helping put those on the cloud. And once that happened, it was kind of a flip, inflection point in the market where these big Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies are starting to see the cloud as the only way to do it now. And you can't really keep these schools, these sets in house. And jump ahead, I took a sabbatical and we were getting acquired and it was going to be very horizontal. And I'm like, my skill set's not right. So I'm just going to take a year off and figure out who I wanted to be. And the reality is I had a great resume that a lot of people probably wanted, and I didn't want to be that guy anymore. So I wanted to get creative again. Wanted to quit answering other people's questions and start just finding my own questions. So I, jumped to the end, I started looking at a couple different kind of emerging tech spaces. I'd always been in emerging tech and and it was a data guy. I got my master's in data management, which I skipped over, but I told you I'd try to shrink it. And anyway, I started looking at data and AI was showing up. Machine learning was really getting hot. And this is 2016, 2017. And so I kind of took another 4 months after getting started to kind of teach myself the math and the code of AI and kind of just dove in from there and ran into a couple of friends and said, hey, why don't we work on this startup together? So that is where I'm spending a lot of my time. There's been a couple more startups in there that I've helped get going and at different levels and different roles, but I love it. I'm probably not as rich as I would have been if I'd stayed on the plane, but I'm a lot happier. So,
Yeah.
And more creative. So I'll take a breath but that's kind of the story in a nutshell.
I think that's something people forget, that we talk about STEM, but we talk about STEAM, because the arts, that creativity is a large part of thinking about mathematical equations, programming, the things that you talked about. I'm also a lefty, and so I live mostly in
I
that.
could tell.
But I also, like you, I majored in public administration for my undergrad, but my MBA is specializing in AI and ML because there's so much more I want to learn about the analytical side. And that's using the data side with the storytelling is obviously something we do a lot in public relations, marketing, branding, communications, kind of the side of the coin that I live on. And that's something that you also, that's the field that you play in, is not necessarily the marketing, branding, but getting people's stories, figuring out what the data is, but also humanizing, right? Whether it's employees or just people in community and how they come together. And that's something that I think is so vitally important. And you've also figured out how to use technology to do that more efficiently, effectively, and getting back to kind of empathetic AI, which is something that we've talked about. People who listen to the show know I love going to AI4. I go to other AI conferences. But this year, what I loved about it was the conversation really was about how do we work hand in hand with AI. It wasn't about AI being the replacement for everything like we hear in the media often, or we see these big stories and we think that that's the narrative with layoffs and things. But often if you do a little more research, it's not, right? And so really learning how to work hand in hand with this great tool that we have. And yeah, we can get to the question of, are we the Jetsons or are we the Terminator later in the conversation? But that's really not where we're at when it comes to the day-to-day.
Yeah, I would love to get back to that because I'm positive on it, but I'm critical. But to your point about, human versus digital, and that was something that came from my sabbatical, was I realized that I felt like we weren't putting the humans in front. And technology shouldn't be a competitive edge against humans. It should be the opposite. It should be an enabler for humans. And we will always have tech. We've had techs, we've had techs as paper and stone wheels, but since the 1780s, 1790s, this whole industrial revolution's been on a big roll that hasn't really stopped. And, if you look at that, it's not devolving, it's evolving. And, AI is absolutely a massive step in the next direction on that. So humans can't adopt tech or fight against tech. They have to find agency with tech. And so I think it's really about establishing our overlay layer that is the human in the mix. And so we have to put ourselves in those ingredients. And we're not very good at it, right? We have allowed society to, define what the human role is as it rolls out. And I think that's one of those things we have to fix. It's a contemporary problem like it's never been. So to your point, back to humans. And before I go down a whole rabbit hole,
I love
uh,
rabbit holes. So
but back to humans, what we do in short for everybody is if you know, in the moment, like let's talk for a second about like, has there ever been something challenging you've tried to learn or that you didn't have a digital answer to, like cooking something or, playing guitar or, right now I'm trying to fix three carburetors that sit on top of each other in an outboard motor on a boat, right? And you think there's enough YouTubes out there, but there's not because there's metrics, there's data points, there's data, diagrams. I know what parts to order, but what's the essence of it, right? Like, what's that magic, the wisdom associated with it? And that's what's happening in marketing right now for a lot of companies and organizations. Like CMOs, you start to see a chief experience officer showing up. And it's because we need to connect with humans. We're all feeling it at a really deep level. And we're doing great. NPS is great. Net promoter scores. Why not? We've gotten metrics. We matured the models. We've got all sorts of data and we learned a lot from it. And I'm not negating any of that value, but there's still a level of understanding, especially on a critical initiative, or if you're trying to reach a population that frankly isn't getting a voice to you. That's what we do in this work. And that is to collect stories from that community, whether it be a minority group or geographically dispersed group, or just somebody that likes, a kind of sports shoe, we want to talk to them about that. Sometimes doing something more than a survey can not only make them feel more connected and more trusting of the source of that, and be able to connect and provide you data, but to tell that in 3 or 4 pages in not a review necessarily, but to get to the essence of what matters in that space. Let's say, if it's sports, why do you do sports? Why, are you losing weight? Are you trying to stay healthy? Do you want to live another 20 years? Get to the essence of why they do what they do, and then ask them to tell us about it. And surveys are great at getting answers to the questions you want to get answered. But what we do is help you understand the questions you should be asking and giving a voice to that person, letting them tell you what they need as a community. And we do that by collecting those stories through a kind of web app that kind of gives us web scale. But then we use AI in a few different ways to analyze those stories. And one thing we do that's kind of unique is emotive scores, everything from like activity level to, anxiety to joy to self-transcendence. And, the 55 scores that sit up on the cloud and just crunch on these stories. And what comes back is a personality. We don't have a personality of the people and the story person is telling the story, but we have a personality of that community to some degree. We start to see, hey, they're really highly anxious, or they're not. They got a lot of joy. They got a lot of hate. They got a lot of or anger. We have sadness and anger, not hate. But all these types of scores, and so we start to see how they're feeling and why they're feeling that way. And then you always have the stories themselves with quotes, and you can go in once you can use GPT to like analyze something and then say, okay, give me 3 quotes that represent that in the stories. And here GPT comes with 3 profound statements that you're like, oh wow, I have in minutes we can take a customer to have a whole new perspective on something they've worked on for 10 years. And it's almost like they just birthed a new baby. Like they'll be like, oh my God. And they're always surprised, shocked, and happy about it. So it's really fun. I'll take a breath.
yeah, I think this is really important. One of the classes that I took a few semesters ago for my MBA was creativity and innovation.
Really?
And I was talking about how do we get people in the workplace to form community, to think about things, and to leave space for people to come forward with their ideas, with their thoughts, with their constructs. That's in essence what you're doing. When we think about surveys, they're often closed, right? You have scale 1 to 10, yes, no, maybe. Maybe you have a little room to leave answers, but it's not getting the real story like you are. It's not pulling out the things that people might not be able to see by that kind of data, because you're getting into qualitative and you're really getting somebody's thoughts, and they may not even realize what they're providing. So I think that's just brilliant. And I'm interested and intrigued on how you came up with this solution in the first place.
Mm. Ooh. Yes, I think you did a good job of hitting on some key pieces there. And we, I had a friend that was this, that my partner was a storyteller, and we did TEDx together. This red circle behind my head is actually part of TEDx Stage Warrior, and I got my machine learning skill set together, and he was doing this story collection thing, and we said, well, it'd be kind of fun to long form text to analyze NLP the stories themselves. And we started looking around at what was available. And there were some, I spent about, I don't know, first 8 months or so looking at kind of case log for 150 years of psychology. Like, what did people study? How did they label that? How did they supervise? How did they categorize it, if you will, and so forth? And then what data sets existed out there? And Watson was doing some of this stuff. And, some of the earlier tools were starting to provide some of that base scoring for these things. And so we started collecting against that. We started doing work and did some web scraping, and you had to get certain size, had to be, we don't do any fiction, so it's not fiction, the fact story. So that matters. If you're going to score things, you want to get supervised labels on the same type of content. So it was a struggle to get going, and what saved us was the LLMs, and not GPT, not generative AI, but the large language models, which are called transformers, because what happens, if those don't know, is that these are very large models trained on semantic relationships between words, right? So you're putting billions of records in there, and then you have the ability at the very end of this thing, if you picture a kind of a big collection of nodes and webs, you go to that very end, you cut it off, or you add a couple layers, and on that layer, you teach it about your stuff, the domain. Like, I want to teach you just joy. I want you to find evidence of joy in this story. I want you to find evidence of sadness in this story. For us, that's a different model every time. And then we categorize that in what I call the Venti model. It's 5 points, very low. It's a Likert scale, low, medium, high, very high. And so surprisingly, it all worked. We were, and what we did was we did a lot of human testing on that. And we actually compared to other systems like Watson, and we had BERT going, and Elmo, all the different ones, and testing that. And actually, we got a fair amount of inaccuracies at first, or not anomalies between the systems, and frankly, found BERT just was crushing everybody else. It was, we read the story and we like, oh, that's the way I would rate it, So we did that work and sample size, and that was 8 years ago at this point. So we've been doing this for a while, but that's categorization, which I'd say 80-90% of people don't even realize you can use AI for things other than generative, but has nothing to do with generative. Somebody might claim me wrong there, but
No. When I'm hearing, because I'm wondering how big does an organization have to be? How much data do you need to formulate these stories and these insights? Because one of the ways that I use AI is that I was getting very frustrated at, most of my guests are amazing, but every once in a while I'd get a guest pitch that seemed really good on paper from a PR agency maybe, and then I would get them on air, because I don't like to do pre-calls. I want it to be like our fresh conversation,
yeah.
Right? So I've done my research, but I was finding that even with doing some research and getting all this great information, that maybe the guest really wasn't prepared. Maybe they weren't the level that their person pitching said they were. And so I ended up with some episodes I couldn't use. And so I created a tech stack that's basically like, here's my podcast. Here are the 4 main criteria that I'm looking for in a guest. It's subject matter expertise, audience fit. Does it feel like I'm having coffee or a really great in-depth conversation with a friend that people can listen on? And then the fourth one always escapes me when I talk about it. But I asked for rankings from 1 to 5 based on deep research from the LLMs and justification for each score. So, and then are they a fit? Yes. Book them now. strong maybe, low maybe, or no, not ready for your podcast. Justification on all 4 points, but then also overall justification, red flags, and topics that they were an expert on that would also resonate with my audience. And so I think this is a small example of what you're talking about is there's so much more. And I think really generative is fine. And yes, I teach digital media. So we talk about AI generated content versus professionally produced user generated. But I really feel like research and this side is where we can get the most out of our use of artificial intelligence.
All right, I'm going to take that and hook on it in a way that you don't know to ask me if you don't like where I'm going with it,
Okay.
because I've been thinking about this lately, and what happens in as creatives and as we go through our careers, think your job changes, right? It could be you always heard the manager. Okay, I was the player, now I'm the manager, right? And some people would hate that move and everything. But for me, getting into AI, and like I said, I've been 9 years in it at this point. It's changing. And with generative AI coming out, it's not as fun and why? Because I was dealing with, like I was looking at I was building models. I was dealing with, stochastic gradient descent, which is this global process that you go through to get good accuracy and, playing with the epsilon models and all this stuff and, machine learning algorithms and kind of testing things, playing with the data, feature analysis, principal component analysis, and that's the last one I'll do to you, audience. And that was fun. But now generative comes out and we're building custom agents and I'm feeding in instructions. I'm essentially an API programmer. Like I'm just sending codes and I'm not doing anything. I'm not really creating like I used to. Now I'm just staging an agent. And I think we're ahead of a lot of people there because we've really locked down the agents to just work with our stories, which is pretty cool. And it is very effective. It's in like our business side of the business is just like blown away by what we're getting done there. But as a programmer creator, I'm a little more bored than I was, right? And that's too bad because, and it's going to happen that way. And like as every job, people say, oh, we're going to lose all our jobs. You might not lose all your jobs, but what you do is going to transform. And hopefully you'll like it more than you do what you do now. I don't know. It's just kind of a moment in time, right?
Oh, very much so. Very much so. And I appreciate what you're saying. I think that is a really interesting way to look at it. We're saying that, I mean, as humans, we want to be creative. This is taking away, for some people, it's opening up their creativity because maybe they don't have the skill set. But for many people, I know for my students, there's a lot of frustration around not is AI going to take our jobs, but well, what's creative now? If they've been working in production, if they've worked with professionally produced user generated content and they've been able to be the creator, be the strategist. And now you have to reframe that, as you mentioned, and think about, well, how do we strategize? But also we know that there is an element of generative AI or AI somewhere in all that content, whether it's we produce the content and then, AI is going to help create show notes for this episode. It's going to create some reels. My team will go back in and correct if we don't like what what slices AI decided to take from the episode, but there's still an element of it, which is a blessing because it helps things happen faster, but it also takes out the humanness of let's pick all of this for ourselves because we know what's going to resonate with other humans instead of letting AI decide algorithmically, this is what we think will resonate.
Yeah. I look at it like, I'm an analogy guy. So I'm going to go to one of my favorites, and that's boats, right? I talk about boats all the time. And I work on stuff. And like, I'll tell you, we need to be floating docks and not docks piling to the floor of the river, right? And because, yes, a lot of there's a lot of image generation and so much. Not only is it just the ability to generate it, it's the ability for people that don't have a creative skill set to generate it and then make it something less than appetizing to us on this, and constantly in social, we're getting hit, you'll get a real story and you'll get a fake image on it. And it's just like, it's soulless for me. Like, I don't like any of that stuff. However, and that's part of our reality. But I also, I wrote a book and published it last year. And I sat on, it's a little folk tale for my grandkids. It's a fun little story about our place at the water. And it's takes place in 16th, 17th century kind of stuff. And it's fun. But I could never have gotten that out 10 years ago. I mean, I was able to put it forward. I wrote 99% of it, but I tone checked and some, cleaned it up. It took me back a couple steps in just, I looked at what it would be like to be Dutch and speak in that period of time. And I went, nah, it's too far. It was like an advisor to me to tune some of it. But more importantly, I was able to generate the images. And I worked a lot on that. I mean, I had to type out pages for each image, exactly what I wanted to look like so that they matched a little bit. And that allowed me to publish with that. But, I couldn't afford the $500 a draft on the illustration to do the book. It wasn't that big a book. It's, I probably sold like 60 at most at this point, and I probably sell 100 before I'm done. It's not that, but so creativity is still here. It's a different vein. It might look a little different. So I would say go with the flow, find your path, and don't forget about humans in the process, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Getting back to Seek, who is it good for versus not? Going back to that question of if somebody has a smaller business, can they use it? If somebody is doing a project, could they use it? Could they use it for a use case where, I mean, I'm not getting stories from people necessarily, but I'm searching for stories. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. And how have you used it, or how have your clients used it so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say most of our customers are medium-sized businesses. We've had some small customers and we've had some large customers. I came into business in 2017 and I said, James, my partner, I was like, we're a project services company and a tech company. We can't be both. Like it dilutes to do both, right? Like we can't fund a developing team and a professional services team and make it. And guess what? We're still doing it, right? And we both plan to cut that string eventually, but we're we've had a unique project skill. You talked earlier about trust and authenticity. I used to do that anonymous survey and work. And I'm like, nah, I don't believe that's anonymous. I'm going to give you what you want to hear. I never really answered it positively. I might throw one or two critiques in, right? But trust matters. So establish one of the things we have to do, and we do that through our people primarily, and in our culture and our system, our decisions we made in the app. But we establish that trust, and people go, okay, this is a place that I can be authentic. For example, if you're in our app, we prove that you're a person at our recruiting level, but our researchers and our customers see you as a username, and that can be anonymous. It can be whatever, and they don't have access to contact you unless we set something up beforehand that does all that. So we do give you that ability to really share your opinion and not get locked into anything. Even if you're employees in a company, there's a certain size that it gets a little more challenging. But, if let's say you got, 5 or 6 places and they're spread out a little bit and we don't ask the wrong demographic. We spend a lot of time making sure we don't ask the wrong demographic and survey questions. Anyway, that trust allows you to share. People will be authentic if they trust the process. And so that is a big piece of our stories, is that people, two things. One is they feel they can do it. And secondly, it's a shocking number of people that want a voice, that don't have a voice. I mean, imagine if you're a big consumer brand and you actually get to share your message to them and they're actually going to listen and do something about it. I mean, how many of us wouldn't want to affect some brands out there, right? And not that all those are that type of project, but people want a voice. Sometimes we talk to middle-aged women, and part of that story came out was a lot about long-term care of their parents. And it was we hear from our participants a lot, this idea of, this has been therapy for me. It's one of the wins in this process, is people sharing that story feel great about having done that and knowing someone's listening to them. And so there's a little psychology in that. And so all that kind of comes together to establish something unique. It's a little bit of magic sauce that we planned a little, we got lucky on some of it, but we showed up empathetically and treated the content with respect, and it's proven to be really valuable doing that.
I'm just thinking about large organizations that have had missteps, the Pepsis of the world, the Targets of the world, when it comes to making decisions for shareholders or because of political sentiment, but facing different forms of backlash because they had the wrong advertising campaign, right? Or they took certain words off their website. And thinking about if they had surveyed employees in this way and been able to get real information about how do the employees feel about this, the people on the front line, the people who have these jobs, sometimes because they just, that's the job they can get, is working at a Target, right? Not even people who are necessarily super high up. But so taking a different step, right? And thinking about all of the people on the floor and what they're hearing, but also how they're feeling about all of the changes happening in a company. What kind of different decisions could be made that could be perhaps for the good of not just their employees, but all of their customers by actually taking the time to listen that intently?
That's it. And we hear about listening, right? And it's what are you listening to that we're changing.
Yeah.
And you've highlighted two. One was like we did a lot of new hire work, and we talked to the new hires and we talked to the hiring managers and the executives. And it's interesting to hear the commonalities across those. And those new hires, hearing their executive stories, and some of those guys would stand up and share their story. It changes that crew. That crew goes, wow, I have a connection to this business more than I thought I did. What I loved was we were doing kind of recurring every 6, 8 months. We would do a few more go back. We kind of collect with a group and that were in healthcare, and they were the phone service for healthcare group. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, these ladies, they were mostly ladies, so I can say they were ladies, but these ladies were just amazing. Like they just had hearts of stone. I mean, they were so strong. That's where
Yeah.
hearts myself are. I picked the wrong term there. Anyway, but we saw like in everything looked normal, but then all of a sudden we just saw a lot of anxiety going up, and there was this need for structure. That was one of the things we measured, and stability and need for stability. And it was just a sign of worry and concern that was showing up in all these scores. And we're like, hey, what's going on, man? Like, this is weird. You got something going on. Oh, we just changed out our executive team, 3 months ago, and now we're restructuring everything. And we're like, well, your people are showing it, right? Like, and these people do a stressful job, right? Like, it's a tough job, but they're changing their responses in the content they're giving us because of what we expect as a business. So we can't give you everything. It's a very it's a bit of a dull tool, right? Because we're not asking a direct question. But what's cool is from this, and GPT's really stepped this up, is you can put it out there and kind of rub the crystal ball and start to see messages. And one thing I love with GPT, we're doing our stories and what's the themes? What's the improvement you suggest? Blah, blah, blah. All right. And it drops a report quickly. At the end of that, I'll go back and say, okay, of what for the stories that are here, of all that I've asked about, what didn't I ask about that the stories seem to tell you matters? And it will come back with 4 or 5 things, and they're always profound, or at least a couple of what you'll be like, oh, wow, I didn't even think to ask that. And that's the brilliance of AI, finding the complex patterns that humans can't find. And so tie this back, creativity, like your creativity using the prompting is huge, right? Like you can never get too good at, tuning and prompting and what orthogonal questions you ask it, because that's where the amazing stuff comes from.
Yeah. It's such an important note. Sometimes I'll realize that I didn't prompt correctly, and I use Claude a lot. And so Claude will go a little deeper and spend a little more time doing research than I anticipated because and I'm like, dang it, I left out that one important sentence.
Well, my partner's an English major, and I'm a tech guy from North Carolina. I call myself TLDR. I should have a T-shirt with it, but everything needs to be short and acronymed. And when it comes to prompting, man, I just it's so stressful. It wears me out. He'll sit there and just he'll treat it like it's his social media, like he loves it, like he'll stay in it, and he's brilliant at prompting. Yeah, so it's definitely a skill set.
Yeah, for sure. So 1 or 2 things that you're really big on are making sure that we stay human-centered. Humans matter, the earth matters. We know that these are 2 issues that can sometimes butt heads when we have these AI conversations, when we're thinking about energy usage with data centers, even when we're seeing things like AWS go down and affect not only, our ability to use different LLMs, but the ability even that happened during final assessments. So my students couldn't get their final assessments turned in. It affects so many different things. And then just thinking about, energy usage for Indiana now that that big data centers uses as much energy as I think two Atlantas. And so we have all these issues that we need to bring into the conversation and make sure that we're using all of our resources really smartly and paying attention to these things that matter. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on this.
Wow, I kind of want to go on a journey and hang with about 5 smart people for days to solve this, because and we wouldn't solve it. It is the moment of our time, and it's probably, I've lived through a lot of these evolutionary changes in technology. We're going to change the world, and they did a little. They did, and I didn't do the paper cards at the beginning. Luckily, I missed that piece, but I've been around for a little bit of it. But I think this one is profound. I really do. It is. I don't think it's existential, but we should be thinking that way. And our planet, this isn't new. We've been burning our planet at 10, 50x its ability to create itself, probably 100x. And in 1870, we started burning oil and we blew through 50% in first 50 years or whatever, right? We can't live like that for 500 years. We just can't. It won't happen. And the planet matters because the planet's what we live on. And our society matters because that's who we are. And then how we live is after that, right? So, I think all that's not just let's hug each other. That's, you want to live, you want your grandkids to live. You got to figure out what to do here. And I mentioned earlier about agency. I really think human agency is a really hot topic that we all need to be not only talking about, but using our feet. I joined a group here called Befriend that just meets with people all over the city and other states and stuff. And then we just walk and talk. And they're all different classes and socioeconomic backgrounds. And it's a safe place to come together and just meet people and build relationships. So we need to be like that, more humans connecting to humans physically, handshakes, walk and talk and all that. But we also need to actually proactively organize society. I mean, we can't let capitalism define us. We've had a really good run for 50 or 60 years on capitalism, but at some point the scales of these things change. You listen to Eric Schmidt talk about AI and he's like, in 6-10 years, it's going to be smarter than the collective human intelligence, right? That's San Francisco talking. I don't know that I believe all that is going to happen the way they see it. But to your point, that's pretty amazing. It has a really big impact on humans and how we work. And, are we the Jetsons? Do we not need to work anymore? That I think that's a viable thing. If we build a society, why work this much anymore if technology can do it, right? At the same time, it can also create more wars, create more ways to kill us and all that good stuff. So we need to be holding the hands of the controls of this. And then back to your point about resiliency and just realizing that we're burning again against all these very limited resources that most of us don't realize there's a global war going on for access to these resources in an ugly way. It's profit win, power wins profit on all this stuff. And it's a war that's, look at space right now. I don't know where that goes, but we're doing a lot to take over all of space. And I think primarily to find minerals, right? And so, and I don't follow conspiracy theories and I don't want to get off on that, but those are all real things right now, at least there's instances of all that. And so I went really broad on that, but I think we all need to understand what that means. And we need to find a common dialogue. We need to find a common emotional connection and perspective to what is to be a good human in this next generation, or we're going to let it define itself to us. And, I'm not loving that second option.
Yeah, no, I mean, complete agreement with you. And I think what's really interesting is even the people who created, I guess, AI as we know it today, right? Jeffrey Hinton talks about AI is going to be, we need to make sure AI is empathetic, that it's basically thinks of it as our mother and a caretaker to us, so that when it is when it's reached a pinnacle, that it still sees us as worthy of being taken care of and doesn't just take us over and, all the things, all the worst case scenarios. Then we have the godmother, Feifei Li, who's talking about actually AI is going to allow us to live in different dimensions. And she doesn't really mean different planes, right? She means you're driving. The example she used at AI 4 in her keynote was you're a mom, you're also a surgeon. You get in your self-driving car, which is really a robot, taking you to work so that you can perform a surgery. On the way there, you remember that you need to order certain groceries. So you're able to, flip to that screen on your glasses and go into the grocery store, put your order in, and they'll be home by the time you get home that evening. You go do the surgery, robot eyes help you do a more precise surgery. You're done. You get back in the car. You realize that you need to order outfits for your daughter's school dance. You go into a virtual store. And so she was talking about it like that and making us more efficient in those ways while also still being able to be human, have families, live our lives, feel fulfilled at work. And so those are interesting. I feel two very different ways of looking at exactly what you're talking about. And then we think about developing countries. I was just recently in Vietnam and Thailand, and we had the opportunity to go visit an AI-based business in Vietnam. And they have 4,000 software engineers working at this business, and they work in healthcare and different things for companies all over the world. Even things like crops, being able to tell if there are certain bugs. They have all these different solutions that are really innovative and interesting, but they realized that they needed to train all their software engineers to prepare for this next stage. So they have spent the last 2 years training 4,000 engineers, getting AI
It's a great
certifications.
leveler, isn't it? I mean,
Well,
like
it's
they're
really
competing.
amazing.
Yeah.
And there are so many markets like that we don't even realize in the United States because we're so US centered. There are so many other markets that are being set up to compete with us that are new to capitalism and trying to get there. But also, we have to think about if we go into a country like that, set up a data center, how is that going to harm a country that's mostly agricultural still?
Well, I don't know if we can deal with this question, but I'm going to leave you with a question. We'll maybe have to come back for it. And that is, if this is our grand technology, if technology becomes the intelligence at the level we're talking, is empathy and compassion a function of intelligence? Is it correlated or causal, or are they devoid of connection, right? And can we just assume something that's super intelligent will be empathetic? There's signs that say that could be true, but nature and nurture, right? If we're nature and nurture, what do we have to do for our AI future cohorts to make sure that they're not, Arnold Schwarzenegger?
That is actually the perfect question to end this conversation on. And we will be having future conversations. I hope that you'll do me the honor of coming back on the show at a future date. I think there's a lot more to unpack here.
So much. I really enjoyed it. It's great meeting you and having
Likewise.
the conversation. And I'll look forward to watching all that you put forth in coming years.
Oh, and likewise. So two final things, a final thought, a piece of advice for somebody who's looking at what do I do next to prepare myself for the next stage of my career or to make that pivot, knowing that I need to lean into technology.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to say two things. One is critical thinking at your level, whatever, if that's crossword Sudokus or if that's going back to school, make sure your brain cognates and does it in a healthy way. Secondly, connect locally, especially if you're getting out of college. Find that thing. Your job doesn't matter as much as you think it does. Do not give it 80 hours a week. Find somebody to help them learn how to read, help them find food, help them just meet, have fun together, whatever. Teach people how to kayak. I don't care what it is. Connect locally. I didn't do that for 20 plus years, and I'm trying to redeem myself now. And your career is never going to change to make you do it. But those that do it throughout their career advance more, matter more, impact the world a little more. So, make a local connection and use your mind.
Fantastic. And then do you have, and it might be hard to choose, but do you have a favorite quote, mantra, verse, poem, family motto?
There's this French guy's name. I can't think of his name, and I'm going to use this. something, and I'm going to paraphrase it. It says essentially something is finished, not when you can't add any more to it, but when you can't take anything more away from it. And it's a great quote. It's better. I should know my own quotes better than that, but and I should know the guy's name. I'll have to record that and then mail it to you on my turf.
That is such a creative way to look at things too, because that's often, right? The artist's work is never finished. You just have to know when to stop.
Yes.
It's slightly different, but similar vein of thought.
Insert any Mark Twain quote right here too. I'm a pretty big fan of that guy too.
Yeah. Amazing. Andy, if it's okay with you, I'll put your LinkedIn attached to your name in the show notes, as well as, of course, sharemorestories.com so people can find out more about what you're up to, how they could possibly work with you.
Sounds great.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me today. This has been such a pleasure. I'm excited to learn more from you. And this is only the beginning.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you to everybody who's watching this episode or listening to it on your favorite platform. Please leave us a rating review. Check out sharemorestories.com. I think you'll be as intrigued as I am. And I hope that you learned something today and that it made you feel a little more confident in building your future. Thanks for listening or watching to this episode of Your Brand Amplified. Don't forget to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And if you want to learn more, check us out at yourbandamplified.com.